So first, I'm going to be talking about what Taboola is, because you've mentioned that it's the largest native advertising platform, so I'm going to touch on that. Then I'm going to briefly talk about the partnership between ClickBank and Taboola. So what does it mean for advertisers who are working with both of us, affiliates and arbitrageurs? And then I'm going to focus on talking about how to create a funnel using AI, because I'm a salesperson and my team are salespeople, but part of our job is not just being, salespeople who are trying to convince someone to use our platform. Is more like selling a package of solutions. So saying like, hey, this is a traffic source, this is a great CPA network, and this is what you can do to generate some profit. So we're focusing on efficiency and offering all-encompassing support. And then I'm going to talk about what's next, what are the next steps, and what's going to happen in the future, in my and our opinion. So briefly going to touch upon what are the latest developments that Taboola is engaged with, and what else is happening in the AI world. So next slide. Why working with Taboola? So as mentioned, Taboola is simply the largest native advertising platform in the world, and we used to call it content discovery. So when I say the largest, what I mean is we reach 500 million people on a daily basis. So 500 million people interact with the Taboola recommendation platform every day. And this happens because we have exclusive partnerships with most of the digital properties that we have our code on. So the technology is called Taboola Feed. And in most cases, and I'm going to move here, and in most cases, originally, you could find it below the article, which we used to call the moment of next. But over the years, it expanded to something that we call the moments of attention, which you can find not just below the article, but you can find this as widgets on mobile and desktop, on lock screen of mobile manufacturer phones and tablets, and in some form of browser notifications. And ClickBank has lots of geos to offer, but the largest one is obviously the US. And in the US, we have the largest reach across all the geos that we're offering. So out of this 500 million daily audience, more than 100 comes from the US, from all these largest publishers like CNBC, like Bloomberg, like Business Insider, and most recently, some Yahoo properties. But this integration is still happening, so watch out. Right. And most importantly, the ad formats. So I mentioned below the articles and across other moments of attention. And this may look very familiar to you, those that are buying display advertising. But the reason it's called native is because it's very news-alike. So it looks like a news recommendation, and sometimes it blends in and looks like a recommendation that users can be engaged with. So it doesn't look like a typical ad. Mostly it looks like a news article that presents a problem that says, hey, this is something you've never heard about. Do you want to read about it? And then people read this article, get engaged with it, and learn more about the product. So in short, Taboola is a very large traffic source that you can buy traffic from. Right. So now I'm going to talk briefly about ClickBank and Taboola partnership. And I think the most exciting part of it is the fact that they complement each other. So as you can see here, Taboola is a traffic source and a place where you can promote your product. So in a sense, it's a demand for a product, even though we on our side call ourselves supply of traffic. For advertisers, we're demand. We offer users who would buy product, and ClickBank is a supply of products. So affiliate marketers all around the world can engage with both and connect both worlds to generate profit. And the most important part is, and I'm going to skip this slide for a second and move straight to this one, is that when working with Taboola, I think the biggest pain point in my experience for the majority of advertisers, and then when you're getting started working with a premium and large native advertising platform, you don't really know what would be the sweet spot when creating content, especially for those who are working with different traffic sources and different native platforms, some affiliate marketers may not be familiar what kind of policy guidelines are specific for Taboola. And part of my job and part of the job of my team is to make sure that the landing pages and the products are compliant. So in my experience, lots of advertisers come and they say, hey, we have this product, we would like to launch with this. And sometimes it's important to say, hey, no, but we have something else to offer. And ClickBank is this type of partner. So ClickBank is one of our largest partners that offers products, which, very excited to say, are fully compliant with Taboola. So we've done a tremendous amount of job collaborating and working across several verticals and products to make sure that the policy automatically allows them. So we've been testing this hypothesis for quite a while, and back in December, more than a quarter ago, we finally rolled out this initiative publicly, and speak with your ClickBank representative or Taboola representative to learn more how it works. But basically, there is a page full of fully Taboola compliant offers available on ClickBank. So just grab it there, speak with your Taboola rep, and get things going. And just to briefly touch on this slide, usually the process is pretty straightforward, and we try to be quite mathematical about it. So we don't just say, hey, go and launch and do it yourself. The way we do it, and I'm talking about the so-called managed service, so not self-service when you're just registering on the website and buying traffic yourself, like linking your credit card. So I'm talking about the managed service, which is when we offer support. So you would usually get engaged with a sales rep who would have an initial call with you, and you would decide on the media plan, work out what would be the test budget, which is usually decided upon how many clicks you would need to buy per selected geo. So tier 1 geos tend to be large, and hence they would need more clicks to collect before you'd be able to make some data-driven decisions. So typically you would be looking at 5 to 6K clicks per platform. So altogether 10 to 15K clicks per test, which usually lasts 3 to 5 weeks, depending on the size of the geo. So if we're looking at tier 1, again, mentioned the US with massive amounts of traffic, you should be looking at 3 to 5 weeks, depending on how successful you are with optimizing. And once we work out the media plan, you would sign the AON. It takes about a day. You would get access to your account straight away, and then you'd be introduced to a personal account manager who is working very closely with the ClickBank team to help you start your campaigns, break even eventually, but hopefully very fast, and finally scale. So that was a bit of a, okay, so I reconnected. Yeah, so that was a bit of a selling moment. And now we can finally proceed to what was in the title of this presentation. So creating the funnel with AI. I think I would like to start with some interesting data points, which I have on my mobile phone because I just couldn't remember them. So we've run a survey across a few dozens of advertisers on our network, and we asked them how much time they usually spend on creating content. Because when it comes to buying traffic on Taboola, I think the fundamental difference is that, and not many advertisers, especially those who are buying with Google search, know, is that the intent is fundamentally different. The buying intent, I mean, how users get engaged with content. Because, for instance, if it's Google, someone has the intent, they're like, okay, I have knee pain or would like to lose some weight. And they Google it, and then they find the right advertising, and they go, they click straight away. And the reason for this is because they have the intent. And with Taboola, it works in the reverse. So Taboola sits on a lot of data. So I already mentioned like 500 million people interacting with it daily. And because we're hard-coded on more than 9,000 digital properties, we're collecting a lot of data. So we're not just relying on cookies, we're not just relying on clicks, we're also relying on contexts. And we analyze all this, our algorithm analyzes all this, and manifests in the form of a behavior algorithm that recommends what people might like based on their previous behavior. So the way it works is someone reads an article and sees a news-like recommendation. And this news-like recommendation is tailored to what they might like based on the mentioned previous behavior. But again, I would call it a cold sell rather than a warm sell, because people don't yet know that they need this product. They might not even know it, but it's up to a marketer to convince them and tell them a very good story. So native advertising, in a nutshell, is about storytelling. And this is why it's so important to produce good content. And I mentioned it previously that when it comes to generating content, it's a three-step approach. And you can see it on the screen. So the first step is presenting the problem. Your ad, which is comprised of the actual banner, creative headline, and in some cases a description, it should present a problem. It should say, this is what you don't know, but you might if you click. And make sure that you draw the distinction between clickbait and an appealing headline, because clickbait promises but never delivers. And with your ads, it's very important that you deliver what you promise. So if you're presenting with a problem, the pre-landing page, as we call them, or a content page or an editorial, it should explain, it should unpack the problem and say, yeah, there is a problem, but don't worry, there is a solution. And this is the second step of the copywriting process, and it also will be covered by the AI tools. And after that, once you explain that the problem has the solution, you finally say, hey, don't worry, you learned about the problem, you learned about solution. Now we're going to tell you that this solution, just for you and just today, comes with a very nice discount. So if you buy in bulk, and you're all familiar with this approach, if you buy in bulk, you'll save a lot of money. So the first two parts, which you can see on the left-hand side, I'm seeing a reflection of myself, so it's kind of weird. But on the left-hand side of my slide, the first two parts, this is what marketers are responsible for. And on the right-hand side, the third stage, which has the actual VSL and the landing page. So the selling page, this is on the ClickBank side. So starting with the first one, and by the way, I didn't mention what I started with. So the statistics from Taboola, we've asked a few dozen of people, of our clients, about how much time they actually spent on generating content. And the finding is, to me, is quite horrifying, that someone spending 3 to 5 hours every week generating new creatives. This is a lot of time. I mean, I'm sure someone can do it faster, and someone spends even more time because they're being very efficient with their testing, which we, by the way, encourage strongly because, and I'm going to talk about it in a moment, but still, it's a lot of time, and time is money. So rather than creating it manually or spending time and resources, money on having several designers, you can do it yourself. It's great to have a team of designers if you have one. I'm not talking about replacing them, but what I'm talking about is rather if you're starting from scratch and if you would like to test something with minimal resources, AI is a perfect solution because you won't be spending too much time and too much money on testing different hypotheses, especially if you're just getting started with native advertising and Taboola. So almost 40% of the people spend 3 to 5 hours weekly, and 35% spend 1 to 2 hours, which to me is reasonable. But again, if you're just getting started, you'll probably be on the 3 to 5 hour side or 10 to 12 hour side, which is close to 20%. So a lot of advertisers that are working with us, they tend to spend a lot of time on producing their ads and their landing pages. Now, starting with the first stage, the so-called presenting the problem. Our usual recommendation is to commence with 9 to 12 ads and headlines, which are the actual creatives. So the way they usually comprise this, you would have a combination 3 by 3. So you would have 3 banners and you would have 3 headlines. So 3 by 3, or you would have 4 images or 4 headlines and 3 ads basically, which would give you 12 ads to test. So 3 to 4 matched with 3 to 4. And you can see some recommendations for creating the best looking ad on the right-hand side. And by the way, it's very important to say that, and I mentioned the different ad formats. It could be motion ads, so animated videos, animated images, 15-second videos, it could be static images. You can add CTA buttons, and it's very important to test different approaches here. But let's say you've learned all this and you're getting started. Right, perfect. I think I want to spend a bit more time on yeah, there's a bit of a delay. So I want to spend a bit more time on giving some recommendations on how to generate the right copy for these ads. And I already mentioned the newsworthiness. So it should present a problem. It should be news-alike. It should be in the short form. Yeah, sorry, there's a bit of a delay. So I'm switching between screens to make sure that I could read this. Apologies for that. So I mentioned that it has to be newsworthy. It needs to be in the short form. So if you're used to, like, let's say Facebook, and you're writing long descriptions, forget about that. You would need to rewrite this. And again, I'm going to tell you how in a second. And you need to hook the audience from the very beginning, which sort of corresponds with the newsworthiness of your headline and the ad. It's a good idea to use some quotes. Copy overlays. So I think this is a very important point for those who are, again, familiar with display advertising versus native. So we're all familiar with that, with ads that needs to be very flashy, that need to grab attention from the very beginning, and it makes total sense. But with native, hence native, it doesn't need to look like an ad. It needs to look like editorial content. So take the overlays, take the text from the images away and insert them in the headline. And I already mentioned split testing. And I mentioned the ad descriptions and the CTA buttons. Now, finally, how much time we spent on non-AI topics? A lot. Right. So Paul and Shrey already briefly touched upon the available tools for content generation, and I believe there will be a couple of overlaps when it comes to the tools that we're chatting about. And there are so many tools that you can use for generating content. So I'd rather be focusing on the practical applications of this tool specific to Taboola. And I'm going to start with ChatGPT, and I'm going to briefly touch upon Writer, which I personally think is pretty good for generating prompts. And there we go. So in the presentation, Paul and Shrey, they mentioned that it's a good idea, at least in the FAQ section, they mentioned it's a good idea to set the tone of the chat with ChatGPT and tell it specifically who it needs to pretend to be. So I started by asking to pretend to be a marketer using Taboola. And I think it sets the tone immediately, because ChatGPT would think as a marketer and would write the content which would be very specific to the marketing industry. Now, so what I asked it to do, because I really wanted it to present, to generate some Taboola-specific ads and the right format, I asked it to generate a couple of headlines which would be newsworthy, no longer than 50 characters each, and that they would need to promote a weight loss product of your own choice, any weight loss product, because I just wanted to see how it would deal with this task. So I pretty much used the recommendations from Taboola Help Center and the recommendations that your typical sales rep would give to you. And I asked ChatGPT to generate me a couple of examples. So ChatGPT came up with some really funny ones, and I think some of them are great, but the problem with them is that despite that they're very catchy and they have some really strong call to actions, they would simply not go through policy. And this is something I mentioned to be, a common problem for the majority of advertisers. So to save some time, I would strongly encourage you to work with your sales reps and understand which words you cannot use. Since I didn't want to spend too much time playing with ChatGPT and teaching it the Taboola policy rules, I just generalized and asked it to remove all the unrealistic promises, because I think this is the biggest problem when it comes to generating headlines or just creating content. So no unrealistic promises like lose 20 kilos in 2 days. We all know that it's not possible. And it's hilarious because ChatGPT immediately apologized for the previous suggestions and came up with some really good ones. So they're definitely newsworthy, and they're definitely on the milder side. So this is something you would be able to use. Now, I took those and put them aside, and I wanted to try a slightly different angle. So I asked it to rewrite a little so they could sound more like headlines of news articles. And as you can see, it changed significantly. So now it's more like it created a bit of a suspense, a bit of newsworthiness that I mentioned, or the problem that is so typical for this stage of the funnel. So it said, hey, new study shows that this weight loss product helps shed pounds safely and naturally. So this is intriguing, right? This is something you would click on. It doesn't look like an ad. It looks like another article you would read. But once again, I wanted to test an additional angle. So I took these headlines, I parked them along with the first stage headlines, and tried something else. So made it sound a bit more aggressively, so tabloid-like. And as you can see here, it went full aggressive mode, so very close to the very initial suggestions, which I think is borderline, so we need to be very careful using those. And now comes probably my most favorite part. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with a really cool tool that we have publicly available, and it's called Taboola Trends. So Taboola Trends basically analyzes ads, it analyzes headlines, and analyzes the actual images and compares them. So it looks at the previously collected data. It's not in real time, but it uses some fresh data. Sometimes it's 1 week old, sometimes it's just a couple of days old. But most importantly, it gives you reliable data, which is based on the actual statistics of advertisers, which type of images and which type of headlines you can use in selected geos and for selected verticals, which to me is really cool. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to use it a bit more. But when it comes to the headlines, the reason this tool is so cool is because it analyzes the keywords that other advertisers use across the whole platform and compares them against each other using the keyword data of the most clickable headlines. So I picked a couple which I personally liked using my experience, but you are free to use which ones you like. So I took a couple of the ones that are very basic. I took the ones that are tabloid-like. I took the one that I would label scientific, the one that was more newsworthy. And I took one from a tabloid and I compared them against each other. And as we can see, the tabloid earned the highest point. So transform your body and health, the innovative weight loss solution taking the world by storm. This is so far predict to be the most successful. So I'm keeping this one. And I'm keeping number 2 and number 3. So the basic CTA, which is basic, and the one that's tabloid-like. So apparently scientific isn't going to stand in this competition. But let's keep it nevertheless. Let's keep 3 or 4, because as I mentioned, it has to be a combination of 3, 4 by 3, 4. Now, I mentioned the tool called Writer, which is a really good one for generating ad descriptions. So this is something that's relatively similar to social. So in some cases, especially if you would like to give a bit more information about the product, you can leave the newsworthiness in the headline, but you can add an additional few lines of the description, which is usually 250 characters, right below it. So you can use Writer for generating these descriptions hassle-free. So you have the headline, then you take this headline and you put it here, and it generates you a quick description, which you can later use as a complementary information for your ad. And you can play around with the different styles, so you can select the text. And by the way, Writer is completely free. I think this is the most important part, because there are so many tools There are so many tools which you need to pay for, or again, I'm not going to go too deep in this because the previous presentation covered quite a few of them. But if you are just getting started, if you're just trying to test what kind of AI tools would be most applicable to your business, I would focus on the free ones at first and then gradually expand, because there are so many of them and you can easily get lost in all these choices. So with ChatGPT, you can generate some headlines, you can play around with them, and then you can generate some descriptions, which, by the way, it's very important to mention plagiarism. So make sure that you're not just copying someone else's ads. It can sound like a good idea, because if you think, okay, this appears at the top of the Taboola feed, so that means this wins the auction and someone's getting the majority of high converting traffic. But if you're copying someone's ads and if you're copying someone's descriptions, the chances are you're not going to succeed as them, because they have a lot more data and they've optimized their campaigns. And most importantly, if you're entering the auction with identical ads, the chances are you're going to mess up your auction as well, because there'll be more competition with identical headlines and you would be both losing traffic. So it's not a win-win situation. Okay. Now that we have our headlines and our descriptions, we can come to the part which I think is even more exciting. So thumbnails. And there are a lot more tools for generating thumbnails, but first it's most important to understand what type of thumbnails do we need to create the actual ads. So make sure, if you're getting started with Taboola, make sure that you resize your images or videos to fit Taboola specifications, especially if you're coming from the social background. And don't make it too flashy. Make it newsworthy. Make it very simple, very clear. In some cases, it's a good idea to zoom in, especially if you have some pictures of the people. Play around with Taboola Trends to see which works better for a selected geo. For instance, for the US, data tends to change a lot depending on the season, but it's a good idea to have one strong focus on the image without too many flashy things happening at the same time. Yep, mention removing the text. Yeah, by the way, this is something that I would personally call subjective. So it's a good idea to add people, especially if you're selling products for people. But funny enough, sometimes it's a good idea to test different variations and see what you can add. So I'm not necessarily saying that animals sell products for weight loss better, but they can be clickable. But in this case, it's very important to test this approach and see what kind of post-click performance will follow. So it's very important to strike a balance between clickability and newsworthiness, but the post-click performance, which is borderline clickbait. So remember, if you're presenting a problem, you need to deliver on the problem, deliver the explanation to it and the solution. But adding people tends to be a very good idea. By the way, play around with motion ads, something I already mentioned. And finally, yeah, by the way, you can repurpose your GIFs. It's very convenient. And in some cases, it's a good idea to add a logo. It may not be as applicable for ClickBank unless it's a massive brand which will sell itself. But in some cases, it may add some credibility and trustworthiness to what you're selling. But again, it's very important to keep the balance between it, because if you're taking the approach of telling a good story first before moving to the selling part, then adding a logo would repel your audiences, basically, because they would straight away think that it's an ad rather than a good story they would be engaged with. Now, so I mentioned Taboola Trends has a section that's not just it's a bit of a delay here. Yeah, finally. So it doesn't have just a section on the headlines. It has a section on the images, and it has a side-by-side comparison of different approaches. So here you have an example. I picked the US, and I picked beauty as the vertical, which is something that we're testing here with the weight loss. And as you can see, and it's just one of the most recent examples, that if you have, let's say, colorful images, it tends to have high CTR, meaning it would have higher clickability. And it's a really, really cool tool, and it's super reliable. So when you're generating your AI images, don't just test everything. Go to Taboola Trends and see what's basically trending. What kind of approach would deliver the best results? Because what's the point testing, let's say, black and white images or close-up images if, let's say, last week's data is demonstrating that photos from a distance would deliver better clickability, hence better results. And by the way, it's very important to mention something. So, and seasoned marketers would know this. When you're buying Taboola, you're buying on a CPC basis. And you would think that the lower the CPC, the lower the CPA would be, which is true. But keep in mind that the auction works on a CPM basis, and CPM is CPC and CTR. So if you would like to lower your CPAs by lowering your CPCs, you would need to increase your CTRs. So once again, we're getting back to the story of striking a balance between clickability, but at the same time, delivering what's promised. So make sure that you are starting with the right images that tell a good story, that are clickable, that are tested with Taboola Trends. And altogether, this would help generate you the highest CTR possible, which in turn would decrease your CPCs. Now that we've collected all this data, now that we've learned what type of images do we need to make sure to have the highest CTR, we can finally move to different tools that we can use for generating these images. And I would split this in 3 sections. So we have online in website, like Canva, which was previously mentioned, like Adobe Firefly, Shutterstock AI, which is, by the way, pretty cool to play with. But I'm not covering it in this presentation. I did initially, but then I just had to remove it because there were so many slides. But Canva is a good example. You would have desktop apps like Midjourney via Discord. And here, I think it's very important to mention that you don't necessarily have to install Discord. You can still do it via web. But originally, it was just an app, which you would need to download and launch. But now you can use Midjourney just from your browser. And finally, you have mobile apps, which is a super casual option. I've been targeted on Twitter, on Instagram, and Facebook, everywhere with these apps. And this is pretty much how the idea of this presentation started a few months ago. I was like, okay, with some really cool tools, let's play around with them. But starting with Canva, sorry, there is a delay. Right. So again, getting back to ChatGPT, before we use the image, we would need a prompt. And there are multiple tools you can use for generating prompts. But again, if you want to keep it simple and if you want to be a bit creative yourself, use Taboola Trends data, look at what is being clickable. So from the previous slides, we learned that people tend to click on women. So I asked ChatGPT to generate me a random description of a girl holding vitamins, because in my mind, vitamins was a good idea, was a good association for weight loss, because they're healthy. Again, I was just trying an angle here. So ChatGPT gives you a very good description. And again, there are different approaches to generating this description / prompts. They can be very descriptive, they can be very short. And again, it's very important to master the tool that you're using by studying what it requires you to put into it to generate the best possible result, because some tools want you to be as descriptive as possible, which would deliver in turn the best results. And some tools, tend to be very concise. So you can play around, by the way, with OpenAI DALL-E 2, which generates really concise prompts. I personally prefer more descriptive ones. And when it comes to Midjourney, which I'm going to touch upon in a second, Midjourney likes big descriptions, especially if you want to generate some very specific images. But for some tools, and especially if you want to be very broad, DALL-E is a good option because it gives you a very concise prompt which you can later use. Right, so Midjourney. Midjourney is well, you can use it for free, but if you want to have the best results, I would encourage trying a paid version. Because when it comes to free version, you would use it on a free, you would use it via a free server, via free chat rooms. And the downside of it is that you would need to, in some cases, wait because the servers are overloaded, so you wouldn't be able to use it. Plus, it will be publicly available. So if you're using it for generating numerous images, first, you would have to wait a lot and not necessarily get what you want. Secondly, everyone will see your images, the ones that you are generating. So it's a good idea to work with the Midjourney bot via personal chat. And in this case, you would need to use a paid version. And you can play around with multiple settings available for you to generate some really, really cool images. And once again, Discord, you don't need to download it. You can just use it from the browser section. Honestly, it takes about 5 minutes to go there, register, go straight away picking a Midjourney server, and you'd be able to use it honestly in minutes. But if this sounds like something that's complicated, Microsoft recently rolled out another free tool, and there's so many free tools available now. Rolled out a free tool which is available on Microsoft Bing. And to me, it's no worse than Midjourney. I mean, obviously, Midjourney tends to be a bit more sophisticated and more specific when it comes to generating imagery. But I would say Microsoft Bing is a very casual version, casual option. As you can see, I used one of the prompts previously generated by another AI tool, and it gave me a few really good options of a very realistic looking young lady holding vitamins. Right. There you go. So how this might look like, by the way. So you would have your images, you would have your ads, let's say below the article on the left-hand side. And on the right, this is a Midjourney generated image. So I was playing around with a couple of options, but I didn't quite like the option that I was looking for. So I was looking for a woman drinking a smoothie to represent a healthy lifestyle. I just couldn't generate the one I wanted. And then I finally saw this one. So I'm using someone else's here, and I'm adding a source at the bottom. And by the way, here we're focusing specifically on the health vertical because we have lots of cases with ClickBank when it comes to health, but you can use it, Midjourney, and you can use Microsoft or other tools available out there for generating images for other verticals. So I was playing around with some images of senior people because on Taboola, you can see a lot of lead generation campaigns. Here, for instance, the image, you have a discount option. So 19 discounts seniors get, and only they know about that. So I quite like this example as well because it looks very realistic and you could easily see it as a thumbnail for a headline depicted on this example. Now, so I mentioned that besides the tools that you would need to download, for instance, like Discord or the ones that are available in browser, like Bing, you can play around with Canva, and again, it's free. You can play around with a paid one, but a free one was enough to test, and it gave me a few really good options. So you would use a prompt, you would pick a style, and it would generate you an image in just moments. And this is an example how the image generation process looks like in the mobile app. And to me, this is like the most casual option ever. It takes seconds. You download the app. Again, it's free to use. You would just need to watch a couple of ads lasting for, let's say, 20, 30 seconds to generate some really good images. So I played with Wonder AI and I played with a couple more. Wonder AI seems to have quite a lot of positive reviews. So I spent the most time testing it, and it gave me some really good results. And it was very similar to Canva. I think it had a few limitations or a few less options available, but at the same time, it gave me the results I wanted. So I used the same prompts generated previously. I picked the style and I wanted the realistic style. But again, it really depends on what Taboola Trends is suggesting, because in most of the cases, realistic is best approach. But sometimes you will see that the data is suggesting that illustrations tend to perform better, although I would typically say there is a tie, or realistic photos tend to win this one. And finally, this is the result, something what I mentioned. So yeah, so you would have your images generated by Midjourney, or by Canva, or by a few other tools like mobile apps. And you would have your headlines generated by ChatGPT and some other tools. And most importantly, you can use Grammarly to check for plagiarism. So I picked 3 examples. So it's a mix and match of 3. So ads and headlines, thumbnails and headlines. And this is how a Taboola format would look like. But now that you have your images, it's also very important to generate your actual pre-landing page, because without it, without a good story, you wouldn't be able to sell. So we can finally move to the second stage. Creating the funnel with AI, pre-landing page, right? I think typically advertisers tend to test different approaches, test different stories, test different angles. But the general rule is that you would need to keep it short, because even though that the data suggests that people love engaging with good content and reading it, no one's going to read a massive story with thousands of words. Typically, it's 400 words, and it's short enough, and it's concise, and it needs to be clean and simple. You can top it off with an image at the top and make it readable. So don't overcomplicate things. I would suggest using the rule of 3, so no more than 3 alterations to the text when it comes to writing good stories. So bold, let's say underline, and bullet points, and that's enough. Don't play around too much with different options. And that's something what I've mentioned previously. So you would have an ad which is presenting a problem, and it takes you to a pre-landing page. And this is, by the way, one of the examples you can find online. You just go to one of the websites which you can find Taboola on. You click on one of the ads that look like this on the left-hand side, and it will take you to a pre-landing / editorial page that might look like this. So in this case, it's an example of a product that can relieve symptoms of nail fungus. And we're coming back to Taboola Trends because I think it's the foundation of generating content. And here you can see some trends related to the keywords that should be used and should be avoided based on how they're trending in a selected geo. So when it says avoid, that means that the clickability, the CTR, is dropping. That means the audience is no longer engaged with these words. And when it comes to the use side, these words you should use because the audience tends to engage with it more. And even though that this data is predominantly used for headlines, nothing should prevent you from including a couple of words in your text. And here I need to take a step back and say once again that when it comes to generating content, you shouldn't plagiarize. A lot of clients come and they say, hey, we would like to take some of the best performing landing pages we found online and just use them. Don't. First of all, you're ruining someone's business. Nothing good comes out of it. Secondly, it's just not a good practice. And thirdly, you will never get the same results. So take some time. Here I'm taking like a super simple approach. I'm just asking ChatGPT to rewrite the existing text, but it's a good idea to put it through a couple of times and rewrite it a couple of times, and potentially put it through some anti-plagiarism tools. And in this case, by the way, I asked ChatGPT to rewrite it, but make it a little bit longer, because for my taste, the text in pre-landing page, editorial page that I found it was a bit too short. And by the way, in this example, I asked it to be a bit more scientific. And then I asked it to add the words, the top 5 words that Taboola Trends recommended. So I said, please use these words because I would like to make it more engaging. Because if these words are the keywords that the audience tends to be most engaged with based on Taboola Trends, probably it will make the text more interesting to interact with. And this is the result that ChatGPT has given me. And finally, and this is one of the most important parts, and when it comes to the partnership between Taboola and ClickBank and the compliance of all the landing pages, that all the products that are being promoted by ClickBank on Taboola, that they have the approval of the policy because they have lots of clinical studies, which are usually linked on the landing page. But in some cases, it's a good idea and a good practice, by the way, because it creates trust from the audience, is to add some clinical trials or some information about clinical trials or information about the studies at the bottom of the page. So I just asked ChatGPT, and keep in mind that ChatGPT can't use closed databases, but you can ask it to some publicly available studies or sources to reference the text that you've just created. And finally, and this is very complementary, by the way, but because now you already have your landing page, you can use lots of tools to generate the headline image, and you've tested it for plagiarism, and it takes you obviously just 5 minutes to generate it, and maybe another 5 minutes to put it through the plagiarism tool. But sometimes it's a good idea to add a video. And by the way, you already have a VSL in the next stage. We'll remember that. But nothing should prevent you from split testing and maybe adding a short video that's narrating the story, because there are so many studies showing, and we all know that VSLs tend to perform better, especially in comparison to the previous approaches and from the approaches from the previous years. But if you add it on the pre-landing page, in some cases, it might deliver even bigger results, because the statistics show that CTA-wise, people tend to be more engaged with video versus static. And people tend to prefer learning about the product from the video. So if you start the funnel with animated image presenting a problem, then give a brief explanation of the product and a short video explaining it, and then you move to a VSL, in some cases you might have the best results possible. And Picture is a really cool tool which we've tested and some of our clients tried. It basically takes you text which you've generated using the AI, and it creates a slideshow, which is super simple. And it works the same way as the tools for generating images. So basically you use a prompt, you use a description, you pick a style, and then you just play around with the order of the slides. And voila, this is the 4 aspects that you need to keep an eye on. So you need to have a catchy AI generated image, which will be your main anchor of the story. Then you need to have educational, engaging text reviewed and rewritten by AI. And you can have an optional AI-generated video for convincing, so which would be below the main text. And finally, just to back what you're sharing with the audience, you can back it up with some AI-suggested research hyperlink at the bottom of the page. So this is what it was. You can use AI for generating headlines, you can use AI for generating images, and you can use AI for generating landing pages, basically for the whole funnel, complementing with Taboola Trends, so you could use the reliable data from the traffic source itself to make sure that your images and headlines and most importantly, advertorials are the most relevant. And I would like to finish with one slide where I basically wanted to play around with the idea, what would be the next stages of development of the AI? And obviously the first stage is never-ending improvement, the quality and speed improvement. They're constantly different platforms are constantly, products and services, they're constantly improving the speed of their product, and it's becoming smarter. And there are constantly new and improved features like finding, adding, altering, removing, replacing elements of the text and code and photo and video, and playing around with all these tools. It's crazy that it all happened in just a few months. So soon it will be very easy to take the existing content and rework it completely, so no one would ever be able to tell what it looked like originally. And I think the second stage would be a widespread adoption. So old players will team up with new players or roll out their own AI solutions backed by their bigger resources. And I think here I just wanted to take a step back and say that it's a publicly available information that Taboola is playing around with AI generative engine. So we have a small group of advertisers who are engaged in beta, and they're testing the AI that generates images and headlines within the Taboola Ads platform. And we're playing around with the idea of additional implementation of AI in content and landing page generation. But that's a process, so it's not yet rolled out. And for sure, new industries will embrace AI and marketers will need to catch up. And I think this ties nicely with the third point, which would be the insane levels of automation that will come soon. Because at this stage, we're chatting with the AI and we're using prompts, but in most of the cases, and you would notice this, that it's sequential. So you complete one stage, you generate a prompt, and then you generate an image, and then you generate a video. So one step after another. But imagine if you would have an AI which is so trained that it doesn't just complete one step after another, but does all the steps all together simultaneously. And this is something what AutoGPT, which is a ChatGPT-based tool, is doing. And I think it's very earlier stages at the moment, but I think at some point we will have an AI that is constantly learning from its own mistakes, and it's constantly learning from, let's say, a person that it's supporting. And at some point you would be able just to fully automate all your marketing routine. And I think the final point is that the next time, if I get the opportunity to speak at ClickBank, I don't think I would be, because I'd be left jobless with ChatGPT generating the text for me, or Microsoft generating the slides for me, and another AI narrating the whole presentation. So probably next time we'll just be relaxing and watching this presentation myself. And that's pretty much. I still have 3 minutes left, so some time left. Thank you very much, everyone.